Thank you, Joe, for that generous introduction. He's asked me to compress all of this in 20 minutes, so I'm going to go tick, 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 and then look forward to the discussion afterwards. So some of you, I know, old friends, are deeply involved in this in Nigeria and in the north. Others may be hitting it more or less new. So I want to do some quick updates and then do a little bit on context for those of you with some maps, those of you who may need reminding. The question of who are the violent extremists, the question of drivers, and then some of the counter narratives that are coming out, especially from Nigeria. On the quick updates, you all know that the state of emergency has been renewed for 6 months as from November. You also know that the U.S. has put Boko Haram on foreign and Ansaru on the foreign terrorist organization list. If you've read the Nigerian news this week, you know that Abu Bakr Shekau has announced that don't think we will stop in Maiduguri. Tomorrow you will see us in America itself. Our operation is not confined to Nigeria, but for the whole world. So we have now allowed them to go global and so that question of who are Boko Haram, and I'll come back to that because it's not just one group, obviously. There's passive support, there's hardliners, there's softliners, and so forth. And that has to do with the narratives for countering it. The international press has increasingly taken an interest in Nigeria. If you saw the November 30th, you can't see the map here, Economist. It's really from Sokoto all the way down to Taraba. It's half the geographical area now, states affected by Islamist terrorist groups. So the red flags are going up. We're not just talking about the three northeastern SOE states here as well, but a much broader. You probably also saw the November National Geographic, all the gory pictures from Kano, and under the title, the war for Nigeria. So there's a larger context there. Some of you may know the work of Eliza Griswold, the 10th Parallel, that starts in Nigeria through Jos and goes all the way over to Sudan in terms of Muslim-Christian conflicts. And so that's a different phenomenon, but these things all tend to embolden and feed into each other. So the international press is watching I can tell you from experience, I try to avoid journalists, but sometimes they ask me to correct their final copy. Believe me, they're hitting it cold, but it's really important. The oil theft situation in Nigeria is an existential threat as well. On good authority, approximately $2 billion a month is being stolen, much of it from the South-South, which reinforces the politics of the South-South in relation to the rest of the country. It's our oil, so it's not theft. So there's that factor to kind of, and that's not getting any better. Now the May 2nd Maiduguri incident was a shock to everybody. Some of you may have seen Goodluck Jonathan's interview when he was in Paris last Saturday, saying that 100 people appeared out of nowhere, 15 to 20 vehicles with rocket launchers. They destroyed helicopters and planes, and we have no idea where they came from or who's funding them. Now, this kind of leads me to my next kind of current events point, which is Obasanjo's letter. I think people are getting increasingly concerned that the president, who has spent only 3 days in Nigeria out of the last 3 weeks, more or less, London, Paris, South Africa, London, and so forth, is just not up to the task of dealing what we're talking. And with all due apologies to the good folks from Abuja, the message that came out of Obasanjo in his letter to Jonathan, 18-pager on December 2nd, is well worth reading. It's in the press, it's in public domain, and basically he's saying, you're part of the problem. Don't run. You've had your 6 years. So that's not the international community saying that. That's Jonathan. That's the man who basically put him in power. He starts out by saying that Jonathan himself thanked God, his parents, and Obasanjo for putting him in office. So when the guy who puts you in office says, okay, your time is up, you know it's more serious than just the usual sort of carping from the sidelines. In reading this, there is, Obasanjo is wonderful in his rhetoric, his candor, in saying there's something that I think we need to be reminded of here, because the Nigerian military is basically, I'll say this candidly, not up to the task. Obasanjo says conventional military actions based on standard phases of military operations alone will not permanently deal with Boko Haram. There are many strands or layers of causes, different approaches, different solutions: drugs, indoctrination, fundamentalism, gun trafficking, hate culture, human trafficking, money laundering, religion, poverty, unemployment, poor education, revenge, and international terrorism are all the factors that drive. So we could just discuss that list right now. But that's a far longer list and a bolder list than probably what we in the academic community are used to parsing out and paying close attention to. So this question of what the impact, and this is a December 2nd letter, open letter now, will have, and it was authorized, it was run past all of the northern generals there, has emboldened people, not only the opposition party, the APC, which is another topic, but it's emboldened people to say, Jonathan's administration doesn't have legitimacy. And so the breakaway of the seven governors, now I guess it's back down to 5 governors, but it'll be up higher when the time comes. So the split within the PDP is a crisis, and the apparent joining of the new PDP with the ACP, the All Progressive Congress, is something we'll all be watching, particularly in Q1, Q2 of next year, when it will really become clear. But the international community needs to be aware that it's not just same old, they'll muddle through. Something is happening there. From my point of view, having been very much a part of both teaching and writing about Nigeria since the time of the First Republic, lived through the Civil War, lived through coups, attempted coups, et cetera, et cetera. This is, to me, a kind of a red zone that we're entering. It's not just the same old, problems of that. So we'll see how that works out. Now, in terms of context, maybe we can pull some maps up here for those of you who just need reminding. I'm going to kind of assume these are in order. This question of the Islam line, this is the 10th parallel that people are now paying more attention to. It runs straight through Jos. And this is a US government map, so it isn't something that academics made up. But you can kind of see the challenge for Nigeria, 170 million people, the largest country in the world, half Muslim, half Christian, is the larger context in which this is going to have to be worked out. And the question of who is the Muslim community, who are the Muslim communities members, who are the Christians, is really important. The Sokoto Caliphate is the key to understanding the North. And also you'll notice that Bornu is separate. The Bornu Caliphate never got pulled into, this is 19th century reminder of history here now. So Bornu was always tied more to the east, and the Sokoto Caliphate, which now includes or has touched on 14 of the 19 northern states, the Sultan of Sokoto, the emirs that we're all familiar with, what their role is, or are they part of the problem as well at present? What they're doing. You probably know that the current national security advisor is the son of the previous Sultan of Sokoto. And notice Jos, the highlands of Jos, never was conquered. You couldn't get horse culture up in there. So you've got that little, and that was, of course, where the Western evangelical communities got their foothold. Are we on to colonial era?
No.
No, you're zooming way ahead of me here.
All right.
There we go.
Okay.
I'll turn around. So keep going. Okay, this is the unification, which you probably know on January 1st. They'll be celebrating or not the 100th year. This is another red flag that goes up. northern Nigeria and southern Nigeria used to be two separate whatevers. And how they, in my perspective, the whole challenge of the last 50 so years has been how do you create national unity? So it's within that context that we're now talking about the Northeast, or if you believe The Economist, which I do, it extends through, certainly through Kano and all the way up to, Kano had more bloody events, only second to Maiduguri in the 2012-13 period here. So that unity is ethnic. I don't like maps that put lines around them, but this gives you a reminder that House of Fulani, Yoruba, Igbo, etc., Kanuri up there, and then Ijaw down in the Delta. But what this kind of doesn't tell you is that Hausa has become the lingua franca for the entire North, including the Middle Belt, the Northeast. Yeah. Okay. Just a reminder of the states. We can go quickly. I think everyone knows this. The states with Sharia law were, in terms of time and place, I'm doing the place here, but the time is really Fourth Republic, 1999 to present. And one of the first things the 12 far northern states did was to set up Sharia law in the criminal domain. That was partly because the Western law wasn't doing the job. They had no idea what it was, and they had been, certainly the British, 60 years of British rule in the North, kept the Maliki law in the, it's all Sunni, but kept the Maliki law in the North as well. You notice the Federal Capital Territory there, which was an attempt in the late 70s to try to create a new capital. It was actually based on Washington, D.C. I was involved in some of the planning of that to be equal access to what is now the six zones. Now, just to remind you, in my view, and this is why I was impelled to kind of write a quick monograph on the year 2011, I just took a one-year slice of time and did a little bit of background on what happened after the election, what happened during the election and after, what happened to Boko Haram and what was going on down in Plateau. And this election results just clearly split the country. Those south and southeast overwhelmingly for Jonathan, and all 12 of the Sharia states for Buhari. If this isn't a red flag, I don't know what is, because you're talking about what's holding the country together, and that little FCT there in itself isn't going to carry the weight. So the Yobe Borno Adamawa, of course, is where this state of emergency is, but basically it's the entire north that we're talking about here now, and that's a larger challenge. Yeah. And just a reminder, this doesn't come through very clearly. When you're talking about the Northeast, I don't know why Adamawa got put on the SOE list, but they are probably because there is an Adamawa in Cameroon as well, and the old caliphate spilled over into that area. And so their people go back and forth there. At one time, the head of counterterrorism in Nigeria told me that he thought that was where Abu Shakar was hanging out. But this Lake Chad, it gives you kind of a sense that there was a kind of a cohesiveness that tied that area together in terms of the Chad Basin. Lake Chad is now just a remnant of what it was before. So you've got desertification, you've got the fact that the water supply, so to put it crudely, is drying up. So these are larger ecological issues that clearly are going to be drivers. So the young men from Chad or Niger come down, they're just desperate, looking for something. And so it's, and then the SOE tries to close the borders, and the effect of closing the borders, well, tens of thousands of people are ignoring that and leaving the SOE territory, but more importantly, it has created such a disruption up there that people aren't planting their crops. We don't have a crop that's coming in that SOE area this year, which is going to be a food crisis before very long. So that's just by way of time and place context. Who are the Boko Haram? I just think the quick answer to that is it depends on when you're talking about. There's it's a Fourth Republic phenomenon. Let me put it that way. So you have the pre-04 period. And then you begin to get the confrontations with the police between this idealistic community and Yobe Bornu. And then in '09, the police, military cracked down, killed the charismatic leader, and they go underground, put him in jail or jailbreak. Some of you know this detail, but I say this because if you read the Boko Haram summary that went to the U.S., that came out of the U.S. Congress, these time zones get all mixed up together, and you really have to say what happened before the death of Yusuf, what happened afterwards, what happened after the jailbreak, and then the factional splits, the rise of Ansaru, and the reactions to the state of emergency now, and the internationalization of all of this. And I would also remind you that with the collapse of Libya in 2011, arms material and came down into back down into the northern Nigeria sort of area. So without going into who are Boko Haram, let me just say there's a lot of there's a lot that we don't know about that, and we probably could find out more if we could do interviews in prisons. But I remind you that these young men are being rounded up, they're being disappeared. Human rights people are going crazy about this, and even the U.S. Secretary of State has said, you know, military aid is contingent on human rights, something that's the law of the land, so don't mess with it. Not that that has had a huge impact, partly because their military are not set up to deal with domestic things. They're set up to do with peacekeeping, to defend their borders from whoever. So what are the drivers? I'm going to just tick these off. Economic, political, and demographic, and cultural. On the economic side, it is a petrostate. Resources come in from the top. It creates people who are left behind and people who are doing very well, the relative deprivation issue. The demise of industry in the north, partly due to globalization from China. All of the textiles are wiped out, all of the light manufacturing, and so forth. On the political side, the do-or-die elections and the fracturing and the regionalism that I mentioned up there, the weak central leadership, the disillusionment with politics, and the reliance on military to quell domestic disturbances. On the demographic side, I've mentioned the split between Muslims and Christians, which in many ways has now overtaken the use of ethnic identities. There is a youth bulge there. We could talk about that all day. Rapid urbanization, the desertification, cross-border migration, and so forth. On the religious cultural side, the Islamic revival, the Metatsini experience, the ultra-radical emergence of Salafism, the focus of the international news and the conflation of regional tensions with religious tensions. So that's where the red flags go up in terms of what are they doing now with the counter narratives there. Some of you probably know that the U.S. is paying more attention to education. There are 10 to 12 million kids in Quranic schools which have dead-end jobs. How do you link that up with the educational sectors, the primary education in particular? What about agriculture? What about the media and so forth? There are longer-term issues that I'll just tag: the disjunction with local government, the fact that the police are all federal, the fact that the military rotational system doesn't give you people who know the culture and the languages, the ambiguous role of traditional leaders, and then this electoral process, which is always a challenge. The Nigerian National Security Advisor's Office does have a behavioral component to it. They do have a report out that deals with all of the good things that you would probably teach from a textbook. Engage with the community, work, deprogram the radicals. It's a beautiful document. The only problem is there isn't the political will, the political leadership to really make this happen now. And so that's the larger issue that Obasanjo brings us back to. And as someone who fought during the Civil War, Obasanjo and the other guys that I mentioned, they are, I think, increasingly worried about the unity of the country. and whether the Abuja, not just one individual, but whether and the people around him, but rather whether the system is failing the country itself. So it's within that context that the international community now has to ask itself, how do we engage? Through development options, through military assistance, through whatever. There are tensions between those, and I hope we can discuss those during the Q&A. Thank you.